Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Creative Musings. I'm your host, Tracy Loring, and here we explore ideas and premises to help you live your life more intentionally. And if you're new here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. Today, I'm super excited to have Harry Max on our call today. And Harry is all about empowering individuals, teams, and leaders to improve in times of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And he does this through one-on-one leadership development and coaching, through consulting, through training, and sometimes even being a hands-on operational leader. And that's how I got to know Harry. Several years ago, I got to work with him at a tech company. And so today we're going to explore lots of different ideas in relation to business and leadership and anything else that comes to mind organically as we explore our conversation together. And in particular, there are several things, Harry, you have left an indelible mark on me. And I have several things that I've taken away from our time together that I sort of refer to myself as Harry-isms. And I have a few of those that I'd love to explore with you today. But before we do that, you're writing a book. And you're writing a book on prioritization. I would love for you to tell us about this book. Why this topic and why now?
Sure. I think prioritization is perhaps the most important fundamental skill that we can develop for ourselves, for the teams that we're working on, for the organizations that we may be a part of. And I just assumed for a long time that it was something that we all knew how to do, and never really gave it much thought. And then in my work as an operational leader, when I was, a VP at a tech company where we worked together, I did my prioritization thing. And when I was coaching with clients, I would help them by doing my prioritization thing. And when I was working at DreamWorks, re-architecting the intranet, getting ready to go public, I did my prioritization thing. Never really thought about it. And then I developed a body of work. It was essentially how to frame problems, different kinds of problems, to apply different kinds of intervention strategies to address those problems. This is the topic of my TEDx talk. And I was very excited about this topic of problem framing and diagnostic thinking. And the TEDx talk, which was about 10 minutes, turned into an hour talk, which I gave at South by Southwest. And an agent approached me there about the topic, a book agent. And then that talk turned into a 2-hour talk, and I was invited to different companies, USAA and Adobe and a number of companies, to give this talk. And I was so excited about it. But it seemed like no one really cared that much about that topic. But all the questions came up when I started talking about prioritization. And that looked, as somebody with a product design background, that looked to me like a demand signal, something people wanted more of. And I looked into the books and resources that were available for the, related to the topic of prioritization, and I found very little coherent work. There were really no good books on the topic. And I was really surprised. And I reached out to a friend of mine as a publisher, a book publisher, and I'm on his strategic advisory board. And I asked him if he'd seen anything, and he couldn't believe that there wasn't good stuff on the topic. And he came back and said, there's not much available. And so I thought, piece of cake, I'll write a book. That was early 2016. And boy, was I wrong. I thought it was going to be easy, and it has turned into an epic journey.
Mm,
And I mean, the thesis of the book is now very simple, right? The best organizations know how to prioritize. They have teams that know how to prioritize, and those teams have people on them that know how to prioritize to identify what matters most. And when they get knocked off, whatever their priorities are, however those priorities translate into goals or objectives or strategies or whatever they're doing, fundamentally, priorities are the input to our decisions.
mm,
They're the input to our plans, and they are fundamental to us as a species. And yet, it is not something that we really think about very often,
mm,
and not something that we tend to do with a lot of rigor.
mm,
And that is really what the book is about.
mm.
It presents a fairly straightforward methodology for prioritizing just about anything.
Mm,
And then it looks at what it means to prioritize by yourself, for yourself, as
mm,
part of a team or in a larger organization.
mm.
And that's about all I have to say about that.
That's fantastic. I look forward to reading it. You
Me
know,
too.
when you think about prioritization, what does it
Mhm.
look like? What would we see that would tell us that we were doing a good job or prioritizing with rigor, like you said? Or what would we see that would tell us that we weren't? How would we
Mm,
know that we weren't doing a good job at it?
yeah. So you may recall from our working together that I like to talk about what it means to stay in control of the timeline.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is I think of this imaginary thread that connects where we are right now with the experiences that we're having to how we got here, like the past, and then what are the options and what are the possibilities going forward. And so I
Mm,
call that the timeline.
mm,
And it's very easy to know when you're prioritizing well, because you feel like more or less you're in control of the timeline. And that doesn't mean that you're in control, but it means that you're not wildly out of control. And
mm,
out of control is very easy because you're just reacting to what's happening. Like the reality is just happening to you, and you're
mm,
reacting as quickly as you can just to try to keep yourself safe, just to
mm,
try to keep
mm,
yourself productive, just to try to keep yourself on task, just to try to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But you don't really have time or space to breathe and to think and to reflect and to respond more productively, and to think about, what are my options here? And how do I how do I select the best option versus choosing the better of the worst options?
mm, mm,
Right.
mm,
So that's kind of the essence of it. It's really, if you're roughly in control of the timeline, you're responding and you're more resourceful and you're breathing and you're reflecting and you're acting intentionally, you're good.
mm, mm.
And
Yeah.
if you're not doing that, the opposite is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, I've certainly felt that. It's
Yeah.
it's funny you brought that up. That's one of those Harryisms I actually used with my daughter, believe it or not. I want to say, was it this week? It might have been this week or last week.
Wow.
I'm not have not been, and who knows in the future, very much of a morning person.
Mhm.
I do very much enjoy sleeping in, and just my natural biorhythm is to stay up later and start my day later.
Mhm.
Well, that's not always an option, especially, now that I'm taking my daughter to school and she needs to be there by a certain time. And so it's my fault. I sleep in a little bit later, and then that puts us in a state of rushing a little bit in
Mhm.
the morning.
Mhm.
And she's 3.5. And
Mhm.
so she is very much about in the moment,
Mhm.
and she will get fascinated by the water that's dripping off of her toothbrush, and I'm trying to encourage her, to let's keep moving, we need to leave soon. And I said to her, I was like, okay, is he, we've lost control of the timeline. We
Oh
need to
my
put the
God,
toothbrush
that's
down.
funny.
And we need to get going. So, where's the balance between that, between allowing yourself the space to be in the moment and to fully explore being in the moment,
Mhm.
and um, having a mind towards that forward momentum and where you're headed, and the sense of time around that. It
Mm.
seems like there's a balance in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's huge. And in fact, that's the last chapter of the book, which I haven't written yet, um, is is it is really on execution, because
Mm.
it's all about the fact that if you've turned prioritization, if you prioritize prioritization, and you do it when you have the time, you won't need to worry about it when you don't.
Mm, mm, mm,
Right? It becomes a habit, and it just becomes part of how you approach the world. So, for example, in the morning, I wake up, and my habit used to be very complicated. Now my habit's very simple. What am I avoiding today?
mm,
What am I avoiding right now? What am I not being intentional and planful about? What am I
mm,
not telling myself? What am I lying to myself about? What do I not
mm,
want to be true that is, or what do I want to be true that isn't? Like, what am I not dealing with? Right.
mm,
And
mm,
when I don't do that, I get caught, just like I did yesterday. One of my clients sent me a note before I sent them a note. They're like,
mm,
hey, what's the status on this? And I knew right there and then it's because I forgot to do that process in the morning.
mm, mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's when I'm working with a client and we're focusing on what it is that they want to create, whether it's in their business or their team or their life, whatever it is. One of the questions I'll ask is, what is it that you'd really love that you're not allowing yourself to see right now?
Mm-hmm.
And often, I always phrase it as, if there's anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there anything? And there always is.
Yeah.
And it's always the thing that, something you said really resonated with me about safety. It's always the thing that either we're not allowing ourselves to see because we don't think we can have it,
Mm-hmm.
or we don't know how
Mm-hmm.
we could get it, therefore
Yeah.
we discount it, or it's too far out of our comfort zone
Mm-hmm.
to allow ourselves to consciously own that that's what we want.
And there's one other.
Mm,
It's not who I am.
mm,
Oftentimes people will think that's just not me.
mm. I'm not the person that could go out and start my own business and be
Right.
successful. That's not me. Yeah, those definitions and stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fascinating. Something else that you said, what was it that was challenging for you about writing the book? You mentioned that it's been a journey for you, and it
Mm.
was a little unexpected in that journey. What were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome those?
Boy, I've given this a lot of thought. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it goes something. It's funny that we just talked about identity, because I think it's very much an identity level thing.
Mm,
I think for some reason I had gotten really wrapped up in what it meant to like be a professional. Like, and I don't mean be a pro, like be really like be a like like a Stephen Pressfield style pro. I mean, what it meant to be an executive, what it meant to be a founder, what it meant to be like in the business world,
mm,
right?
mm,
And set my artist in the back, my internal artist in the background. And like when I had a chance, I would do my photography. When I had really nothing else to do, I'd pick up my guitar, or maybe I would do a little writing, or so the artist who is in me, who I really identify with and have ever since I was a kid. I've really thought of myself more as an artist than as anything else. That was in the background. And what was in the foreground was this other identity. And I was always trying to prove that I was that
mm,
professional. And I was always working hard to be that professional. And I was always taking on the next great challenge as that professional. And it was, often that meant the money, and it meant the stock, and it meant the difficult, really difficult situations that I knew I was really good at wrangling. And I got so much feedback early on that the book sucked badly, that I realized I was going to have to commit to it in a way that I hadn't committed to anything since my first startup.
Mm.
And over a period of time, I noticed one day that I had flipped. It wasn't like I saw it happening, but I had rented an office. It's a very artistic office. It's like, my stuff is everywhere. My music's everywhere, paintings everywhere, stuff all over the walls, paper all over the floors. And I thought, oh, wow, I am leading with the artist now.
Mm-hmm.
And that has moved into the foreground, and the professional has moved into the background. And it's not like I'm not still a business person, right? I mean, most of my clients are, CEOs or, GMs or, very super senior people. And my ability to be present with them and understand their world and communicate with them successfully, and apply all of what I know and be an executive coach in that context, draws from this other stuff. But I lead with the artist now.
Mm.
And that it was that struggle of making that change and not seeing it happening, but I just kept staying present to the need to do the thing that was required to get the book done, and setting the ego back every time I had a setback, and just taking the feedback and looking at it as a gift, as difficult as it was to unwrap at times, and as disappointing as it was once I unwrapped it at times. and I would say a lot of it just boils down to that.
Mm. Yeah, boy, I can really identify with that, especially around artistry. It was really interesting. I went through this journey in my life where I'd been doing some form of artistic expression since I can remember, and then somewhere along the lines, I lost touch with that. And I went through a phase where I just really felt like I had gotten off track. Like somehow I had taken a path that was so far removed from who I believed I was that it just felt wrong, and I was having physical reactions to my reality because of it. Like it was so ingrained in me that I was not living my truth, that it became very, very clear. And it took me getting physically ill and having my husband tell me, "You're not fun to be around right now." That really made me take a step back and go, okay, wow, whatever this stuff is that I'm internalizing is now being outwardly visible, and it's starting to impact things in my life that really matter to me, like my health and my relationships. That I took a step back and reevaluated it. And one of the first things that I did was re-examine my definitions of myself. And it's where I stepped into and owned for the first time in my life the label of artist. And when I did that, it completely unlocked so much creative energy that I had been stifling because I wasn't allowing myself to tap into that and lead with that. I love how you said that. Lead with that energy, right? Because I was a professional, I was a leader, I was in this, environment where I had responsibilities and things like that. And, that wasn't something that I thought I could balance or somehow merge together. And so I was separating myself. I was making part of me wrong. And that just wasn't serving me. And so that was a really big shift for me. So as you redefined yourself and allowed yourself to lead with that definition of yourself, what opened up for you? What did you notice? What changes did you notice in your life after making that shift?
Well, I think they were subtle, some of them.
Mm,
I think the first one was just kind of an ease that I felt in the world
mm,
in a way that I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I started feeling like myself,
mm.
and I recognized it. It was odd. And I didn't know that I didn't feel like myself before, but
Mhm,
now I
mhm,
started feeling more like myself. And I that gave me the sense that I could just speak what was on my mind. Now, I always felt like I could speak the truth, but it always felt like it came from a place of trying to right a wrong or
mhm,
trying to make a point rather than just speaking and presenting whatever it was that was there.
mhm,
And I don't know how to explain that any other way. So that's number one. Number two, I noticed that my writing changed. It
mm,
changed from being kind of abstract and academic to being much more closely drawn from my personal experiences. And it was the first time that that it became obvious to me that, oh, I now have to write the book I didn't want to write because I have to tell my own story. I have to talk about
mm,
experiences I've had, and I have to use that to make clear there's no other way to do this, right? What's unique about this content is my perspective on the content.
mm,
And that's actually the coherency of the work is an artistic expression
mm,
of my
mhm,
understanding of the work. It's not there's no objective truth to this work.
mm,
It's not an academic treatise. It's not a dissertation. It's not a logical proof. It's that what people will take away from this work is that I've had some experiences and worked with some great people at some great companies. And, you know, I've approached things in ways that, like, here's an example. I got to the point where I'm like, okay, you know, people talk about how getting good, like really good, you know, is about practice, practice,
uh-huh.
practice.
Yeah, mhm, yeah.
And
So
I was
many
like,
hours that you've put into
right,
it. Yeah. Mhm.
right, the mythical 10,000 hour thing
Uh-huh.
and all of that. And I was like, well, that's based on a story about a couple stumbling on somebody in New York on their way to Carnegie Hall, right? And I was like, okay, so what do you do when you get there? Like, what do you do when you've done all the practice and now you've got to show up?
Mm,
And I was like, who inspires me,
mm,
like deeply inspires me as an artist who's done that? I
mm,
was like, Roseanne Cash,
mm,
right?
mm,
And so I did what I do. I figured out how to reach her, right? I found her agent. I wrote an email and he read the email and he said, this sounds really interesting. Let me reach out to her. And he
mm.
reached out to her and she said, this sounds really interesting. Let's talk. And so I interviewed her for the book.
Huh.
And so there's a chapter in the book, I think it's chapter 3, that starts off with my story about talking to Roseanne Cash about what happens when you get there and you're at Carnegie Hall.
Mm,
And you do need to show up with your priorities straight.
mm, mm,
That was the artist that did that. That wasn't somebody trying to explain prioritization. That was
mm.
me connecting with somebody who inspired me as an artist. And I showed up as an artist. And it turns out we have mutual friends. Crazy.
What a
So,
great story. Oh, yeah. And it's interesting because when I reconnected to myself as an artist and I
mhm,
reconnected to my love of art, I also reconnected to my love of helping other people express themselves artistically.
yeah.
And I created a brand called Your Budding Artist. And it was funny
Mm,
because when I lived in Bastrop, Texas, I one of the reasons why I moved there was to join the art community there. There was a really lovely
Mm,
and flourishing art community, and still is in Bastrop. And I would show my work at the local gallery, one of the local galleries, and I would teach some classes there. And I had someone mention to me, they introduced me once as, yeah, Tracy is your budding artist. And I was like, no, 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 your budding artist is you.
mm,
And the way I would define art is self-expression.
mm, mhm,
You know, art is self-expression meant to convey or evoke an emotion, even
mhm,
if the viewer is only ever yourself.
mhm,
And so my perspective was that we are all artists in the world in one
mhm,
way or another.
mhm,
And tapping into that artistry means creating and expressing yourself,
mhm,
you know, even if nobody ever sees it, but just finding a way to express that in yourself. And that really resonates with me, what you're sharing about your journey there. And it reminds me of one of your, or what I call your Harryisms,
mhm,
that has left a mark on me. And I'll never forget any of these, honestly. But it was early on when I had first met you, and I think you had been sharing part of your journey and what you had done in the past, and we were talking about some of these tools and frameworks
mhm,
to go out into the business and really understand what's wanted. And I remember you sharing, I asked you a question about being a consultant and going in. You had gone into organizations, large, significant organizations, and helped them make really big decisions about
mhm,
the future of their business. And I remember you sharing that, um, you know, you said, Tracy, it's not about knowing the answer. It's not about knowing it. It's about figuring out how to get it and who has the information that you need. And
mhm,
you kind of alluded to that a minute ago
mhm,
about it being what you did. And that really was an aha moment for me, because
mhm,
what it did, a couple of things. First of all, it allowed me a mechanism to step out of my imposter syndrome,
mhm, mhm,
because all of a sudden I didn't have to have all the answers and I didn't have to know. All I needed to do was find a way to get there. And there were
mhm,
tools and resources and skills that I could build that would allow me to do that more effectively.
mhm,
You know, and I wonder, in your work, and you've done work with so many different leaders in so many different industries and leaders at different levels, you know, what sorts of things can leaders do to help them step out of, recognize when they're in it, but also step out of that imposter syndrome a little more effortlessly?
You know, I love how, and this is where the artist shows up, right? Because it's so much of my experience now is synchronicity.
Mm.
I literally interviewed the CEO yesterday of a multi-billion-dollar company doing I'm doing a verbal 360 for one of his direct reports.
Mm,
And he is very thoughtful and really just has this impish uh, kind of approach to, like, putting his finger, a kind of metaphorical finger, right on top of the thing that really matters. Like, it's like it's the thing. Like, he
mm.
knows how to identify the thing. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's why he's CEO. Because I've interviewed 18 people. He was the 19th person that I've interviewed. And I have this, you can imagine the structured interview process. And I got emotional. I mean, it was joy. Like, the tears in my eyes are like joy, because this was such a wonderful conversation yesterday. But it was so funny because the guy that I'm interviewing, excuse me, the guy that I'm interviewing for
Mm,
is uh, he reports to the CEO. He runs the entire product organization. It's a big company, tech company, and I'm getting all this feedback about where this guy, who's only been in this role for about a year, and he's been at the company for a long time, where my client is struggling, and he's trying to get better. And so I said to the CEO, I like using the Johari window framework, right?
mm,
Like, what do you know about, like, what's known about self and what's known internally, right? So there's
mm,
things that to identify a blind spot, right? You want to
mm,
find things that other people know about you that you don't know about yourself, or
mhm,
that you're telling yourself don't exist,
mm,
right? And so I said to the CEO, I said, so, I'm really trying to get a handle on what this guy doesn't know about himself, or doesn't really have a sense of, but you or everybody who works with him does know,
mm,
right? Even
mm,
if you haven't articulated it before. And that he said, the CEO said, the leader that's in question, he goes, he took my previous job. Like the CEO said, I was promoted to be CEO out of the role that this guy's now in.
mm,
He, my client, thinks that he needs to be me. And the CEO said, but he needs to make the job his own. Like,
mm,
he's going to be successful, not because he's better than me, or
mm,
even as good as me, or as capable, or anything else, but he is simply going to make it his own
mm,
somehow. And that will allow him to relax and to
mm,
breathe, and for people to follow him.
mm.
And, you know, there's a lot more to this story, and I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
clarifying it enough, but
Mm,
the gist of it is so simple, right?
yeah. Yeah.
You have that my client needs to show up as his own person, as his own artist, in his own life, in his own way, and make that job his own. And that's the thing that's going to make him successful, not being better or more capable or
Mm,
more skilled or driving harder.
yeah. Yeah. The word that comes to me as you're sharing that is authenticity.
Yeah,
And it's a word like, and it's one of these words that can
yeah,
sometimes be overused, like vulnerability and blah blah blah, and whatever. But there's a theme here that's really coming out of our discussion around really owning yourself,
yeah,
owning who you are, and allowing yourself to be you in all of your warts and beauty, right? um in all aspects of that. And I see that a lot in leaders, and in myself, in my own journey. Gosh, I've gone through the rigor as a leader. And reflecting back on that time, there was so much that I was doing because I thought I needed to be a certain way, instead of just allowing myself to be me, you know? And
yeah,
so I was reinforcing the fact that I wasn't who I thought I needed to be because I wasn't me. And people can read that
yeah,
so quickly.
yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, the trite label for it, unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
trite, but the trite label for it's authenticity. But
Yeah.
it's like the the author who the sort of the speaker, author, the person who represents the path to getting to this the best is Brene Brown,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's so much of it hinges on our willingness to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
is our ability to show up, is our ability to show up whole.
Yeah.
And that means integrated. And that means not just the good, but the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I love her work, and had an opportunity to hear her speak a couple times in person. And
Hmm.
that was really, and she's from Texas, and so that was really cool,
Hmm.
while I was living there, to be able to see her and her native element as well. But there is an element of that, and it reminds me of another Harryism that I took with me. And that was, at the company that we worked at together, one of the things I loved about this organization was there was encouraged people to explore different roles, right? And I was working with you in your organization, and there was another role in another part of the business that I was interested in exploring. And you, as my leader, but also the organization, encouraged open conversations around that, right?
Hmm.
So I remember having a conversation with you about, hey, I'm going to go have this chat with this person about this role. And I came back and I shared with you that experience, and I was like, I don't know, something didn't quite sit with me quite right. And you said to me, after having this conversation, you said, Tracy, go where you're loved. And I think that was the first time anybody, especially my leader or a leader that I was working with, in a business context, that used the word loved in relationship to work. And it really, really stuck with me. We talk about, loving what we do,
Mhm.
but this was really about being in an environment where you feel supported. And
Yeah.
I've been on a mission lately. This is I've come to specialize in working with teams
Mhm.
and helping them transform into the team that they want to be to meet their objectives going forward. And
Mhm.
team transformation and collaboration effective, all this stuff is kind of my sweet spot lately. And the mission that I'm on right now is, for lack of a better phrase, bringing humanity back to the workplace,
Yeah.
because that's really what it came down to in the essence was, you know allowing ourselves to say, what would I really love in my workspace, in my work environment, not just from what I do, but in the space that I'm in, and how can I bring my whole self
Mhm.
to this space. That was something that really stuck with me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Your comment, once again, just my eyes teared up with joy, thinking about how important that is. And I reflect on a conversation I had with Paul Henderson. I don't
Mm.
know if you've met Paul.
Yes, yes.
Paul came in as a consultant where we worked, and I've worked with him as a consultant. I worked with him as a peer at a previous very, very large company. He was one of the most gifted people I've ever worked with. And he's a brilliant man, and just an incredible intellect. But he also looks like the skipper of a fishing trawler. And he's kind of got this crusty look. And I mean, he's taught strategy at like Columbia. I mean, he's really smart, and he's a lot of fun and very well read and deeply into science fiction. He's just a great guy. But, he's got this super crusty exterior, and he's really capable in a business context. And I was talking to him many, many, many years ago. Oh, I remember when it was. It was like 2000, and must have been 2005, right when I left DreamWorks and I went
Mm.
to start my executive coaching practice. And I was putting together a program for Google, which is how I
Mm.
really got my start in executive coaching. Because when I presented it to them, they were like, "We've never seen anything like this. We love it. We definitely want to bring you on board." But in that process of getting to that with them, I sat down with Paul, and I was like, "Paul, you know me really well." And I said, "I am trying to figure out how to characterize my personal brand."
Mm.
And he said, "I don't know about that." He said, "But your secret weapon is love."
Mm. Mm.
The incongruity of hearing those words come out of his mouth with his skipper like face left such an indelible impression on me that it
Mhm.
was like, I need to lead with that wherever
Mm.
I go.
Mm.
Right. So you benefited in that moment where I shared that with you about where to go and, go where you're loved. Part of that came, I would bring it right back to the conversation I had with Paul, who I would say you should definitely interview. He is a lot of fun and interesting guy. Um, if he'd, be willing to do it, but
Mhm.
I digress.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's great. Good to know. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. The more I work with different organizations, the more I work with individual leaders,
Mhm.
it does come down to something just so simple as allowing ourselves the space to be human.
Mhm.
And that means owning the ickiness and being willing to look at the ugliness
Mhm.
along with where we want to go and the vision for where we want to be and who we want to become and all of those things. And there's a skill there in self-awareness and cultivating that
Mhm.
along with the other side of that. And sometimes we can focus on one more than the other, and there's really a balance there that serves. But there's something there, like I see it in teams and in organizations who create the space for people to bring their whole selves and create the trust in their group where they can do that,
Yeah.
and in a way that just, in this space, this is a safe space where I can come in and be me and share what's going on, and I know you're not going to judge me for it. And how much that transforms how they operate and how they feel and what they can achieve. It's just a really inspiring thing to observe. And I just think, wow, how different. Sometimes we use the term corporate as a bad word, right?
Mhm.
Oh, I don't want to go back to corporate or whatever. And it's like, why?
Mhm.
Why does it have to be?
Yeah.
That's sort of uh, the opportunity in front of all of us, I think.
Chapter 1 of my book opens with a story about the company where you and I worked together,
Hmm.
when the moment I got a phone call that my boss and your friend
Mm,
was leaving the company.
mm, mm.
And it really paints a picture of how the culture of that company was in the magic of that was in its aliveness.
Mm,
And in its aliveness, they created a place where they didn't lead with shame.
mm.
And they did create a space that was largely psychologically safe for people
Yeah,
to show up as themselves in in all of the goodness and sometimes the not so goodness.
yeah, yeah. Speaking of psychological safety, that leads me to another Harryism. There's so many. I have a short list for today, though, but there are plenty more I could come up with. But and that was, I remember you having a post-it note in your workspace
Mhm.
that just had 3 words on it, and it was invitation and choice.
Mhm.
And I remember noticing that. And I don't know that I ever asked you about it, but I just remember noticing it and
Mhm.
just sort of, it just stuck with me. And on my own journey in becoming a coach and just my own personal work, I have done some work and study about trauma,
Mhm.
and in particular trauma and embodiment, and how we can
Mhm.
internalize a lot of that and carry it with us in our bodies. And it just, those words have come back to me over and over again over the years, and especially in the context of trauma. And
Mhm.
talking about creating a safe space in a work environment, and how important invitation
Mhm.
and choice are in every moment. And especially, I do a lot of guided meditations and visualization exercises and things with the folks I work with in all contexts, and how to incorporate choice into those as well is something that I've been working on. I'd love to hear from you, especially from a leadership perspective. What can leaders do to create more invitation and choice in an environment where, the people that you're responsible for aren't necessarily making the decisions?
Wonderful question. um, I want to answer it obliquely,
Okay.
which is to say that I think the easy thing to do would be to try to answer your question. But what I really want to do is tell you where those 3 words came from,
Mm, mhm,
because I think that's more important.
mm,
In the same time period that I had that conversation with Paul Henderson about how I could show up as a leadership and development coach at a company like Google, I really wanted to invest heavily and explore in making sure that I understood not only what my personal brand was, but what my mission was. And I reached out to a fellow by the name of Ward Ashman. He's a clinical psychologist. He runs a culture coaching firm called Trimergence, and he is one of my mentors and friends and creative partners. And I said, I remember talking to him about this, and I said, Ward, it's so important to me that I really understand what I'm pursuing here. And he and I had this conversation when I lived on Loretto Street in Mountain View,
mm,
and he teased out of me in conversation what my mission was. And I wrote it down. I remember doing it. And it was, I'm trying to create the world that I want to live in through constant invitation
Mm,
and choice.
mm,
And
mm.
so all I did was get rid of the word try, because we all know what Yoda says about that. There is no try, only
Mm,
do or do not. There is no
mhm,
try. And so I'm creating the world I want to live in through constant invitation and choice. And what that meant to me was creating the space for people to see that there are options, and to I don't even know how to say it, but it's like create an opening, not a trite invitation, but just create an opening, an on-ramp, a stable bridge between where they are and where I believe we probably need to go together to address whatever it is that needs to be addressed. You know, at the company where you and I worked, you know, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the hidden operating model was, right?
mhm,
The cultural operating model. And it boiled down to, look, the customer and you need to be on the same side of the table, and you need to put the problem on the table, and you need to look at that problem together and then work toward a solution on the other side of the table together. And so you and the customer are not on opposite sides of that table, right?
mhm,
You're sitting there together. And so creating an invitation is very much about that. It's about getting next to somebody and looking forward with them and helping to establish a safe path forward, and then walking with them on that path to the point that it makes sense, and giving them the choices they might need in order to take that journey in a safe and productive way.
mm,
And
mm.
so in conversations with people, sometimes I will hear people sort of use, I invite you to do this, I invite you to do that.
Mm.
Well, that just irritates me. That's not invitation.
Mhm.
That's coercion,
Mm, mm,
right? And invitation is is really getting on the same side of the table, or getting on the same side of the bridge, and looking at the possibilities together, and talking about them, and then facilitating moving forward together in a way that's safe and productive. And that's my long-winded answer.
Thank you for that. Oh, I love that. And, especially from a leadership perspective, right? I've always loved that analogy of being on the same side of the table and
Hmm.
looking, because you're both looking in the same direction,
Hmm.
as opposed to looking at opposing directions at each other. And it just inherently makes you feel more connected to the solution and the partnership that
Hmm.
you're on, that you're taking in order to get there. And as a leader, I can see that shifting perspectives quite a bit for folks in terms of that, and creating space for um, people not only to see the possibilities but also to make the choices that lead them to the learnings that are going to serve them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Based on their priorities.
Oh, nice way to tie it back. Something else that came to me as we were talking about priorities earlier in our conversation is, I do a lot of work in helping people to identify what it is that they really want,
Mhm.
whether it's in their team or their business or their life, whatever it is, and then helping them with structures to keep their focus there.
Mhm.
And it sounds like prioritization and a lot of the stuff you're talking about is one way to help people keep their focus on what really matters,
Mhm.
and creating the space to let how they get there evolve. One of the things I heard you say was, you know when you're prioritizing effectively when you have that thinking space, when you have the space to step back and look at things and evaluate and check in. And that's where the insights come. That's where the creativity comes
Mhm.
and the innovation as well. And so there's a strong alignment there between those two premises. So,
Absolutely. And the methodology that I present in the book is called DGAP,
mm,
DEGAP.
mm,
Decide, engage, gather, arrange, and prioritize.
mm, mm,
And decide right up front is decide whether you have time to
mm,
prioritize and whether the benefits of prioritizing and taking the time to do that in an intentional and perhaps methodical way outweigh the the um, the cost of not doing it.
mm, mm, mm. Interesting. One other Harryism that I'll bring up today is I remember when, again, going back to some of our earliest conversations, and you were sharing your journey with me, and you had mentioned that you'd been a coach.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, I remember through the course of my life, this term life coach had sort of come up once or twice. And I remember sort of going, that'd be interesting. At the time, I wouldn't have imagined I would consider myself in that bucket. But it was something that always kind of intrigued me. And I remember asking you about it a little bit about what that experience had been like for you. And I remember you saying something to the effect of, it's great, it's wonderful if you're considering you might want to do that, but you need to be prepared to do the work yourself.
Hmm.
And I just remember noting that and going, yeah, that makes sense, and logging that and tucking it away and going on my merry way. And when I started on my own journey to really cultivate my own self-awareness from the perspective of just getting my shit together, right? My life was just felt out of control at the time.
Mhm.
And then it became, clear that this was a way that I could live my mission, is to help others by becoming a coach. And I've continued to do that work, right? It's one of the things I notice, and we joke about this in our coaching circle, that I always notice that I'm learning the thing, or relearning or deepening my learning of the thing that someone I'm supporting is learning or just about to learn themselves. And so it's this virtuous cycle of continuing my own journey of self-awareness and cultivating that, and learning how I trip myself up and how to keep those structures in place that serve me, and taking those learnings, going back to the hero's journey, those elixirs that I'm gathering along the way, and taking them back out into the world. It's very much something that I see, as you sort of reflect on your own journey. What are some of the things, the practices that you put in place in your own life to keep doing that work for yourself, that helps you serve others at the highest?
Boy, it's such a simple question, but it is a big answer. And let me see if I can answer it succinctly. Well, I'll make you laugh. Where's my phone? It's in my pocket. So so here's my, you probably can't see it. Here's my learning map,
Uh-huh.
right? For the year, right? It's not actually in my phone because I've been writing down all these things, right? I've got IDC map making. I've got a T group I'm going to be doing at Stanford. I've got to learn this one tool. Like I've got like more than a half a dozen things on here. And they're all areas where I know that I'll be back up even further. Um, I live by the substitute teacher rule. I need to be at least a day ahead of the
Yeah.
students.
As an
And
instructor, we always say a page ahead in the manual. Yeah.
exactly. And there are areas where I see that I need to be able to use something, but I don't know if I'm good enough. And I start having that imposter syndrome thing going on. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to do enough to help, to be of use and not do any harm. But
Mm,
how do I get good? And then how do I develop mastery? And so I am constantly asking myself, are there better ways to be of service? And when I find them, I do enough work in advance, or I outsource the work to somebody who's better, who may be more, who may be better, maybe more qualified. And then if it works out well, I'll go get trained in that. And
Mm,
so what I find is I literally keep what I need to learn in my phone as it is the thing closest to, it's closer than my wallet, right? Of things I'm working through, and they're highlighted in terms of what I need to be doing. And there are things on here that I'm using with clients that I myself am not capable of deploying as tools. And I now know I need to go learn those and maybe get certified in those things so that I can be effective at using them. All that being said, that's just cheating. The real answer is I have a coach,
mm-hmm,
right? And my coach is a very talented psychotherapist,
mm,
right? Because every 2 weeks we sit down and we talk about, what is it that either I'm struggling with, or where have I had interactions that I myself am not sure how to handle, or how do I improve, or how do I get better, or what decisions do I need to make, and how might I think about those, right? So I have somebody that I'm relying on to help hold me accountable and help me see things that I can't see, in much the same way that other people are paying me to do that for them. But I myself don't need somebody to help me plan my business. I don't need somebody to help me strategize. I do a lot of that myself, a lot of the sort of the businessy sides of the coaching stuff. What I need help with is where I find myself struggling. And sometimes there's just these very subtle, minimal cues that I need to do some work. And so he'll help me tug on those.
mm,
And we'll work on those. And sometimes there's more of it, and sometimes there's less of it. Sometimes it comes up in my personal life. Sometimes it comes up in an interaction that I have when I'm driving. Sometimes it comes up when I'm with a coaching client. Who knows? But so I'm putting my money where my mouth is. Do I believe coaching is valuable? Yes. Do I have a coach? Yes. Do I know what kind of coach I need right now? Yes. And that coach needs to be a psychologist that can help me work on the aspects of myself that perhaps are not quite as well integrated as they could be,
mm,
or I need more skill development in order to have more flexibility in terms of how I interact with people and the world around me.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. We always, in my coaching circle, we talk about when folks explore the idea of coaching with us.
Mhm,
One of the things we'll always encourage people to do is, as they are vetting coaches, to ask whether or not they're being coached.
mhm.
And to really have a strong think about, I wouldn't recommend coaching with somebody that isn't being coached.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a turn of phrase that a colleague likes to use, and I use this a lot with my clients, which is, one of the values of coaching is you can't see the label of the jam jar you're in.
That's good.
And that's one of the things, a coach can do for you, is reflect back to you the things that you might not be seeing for yourself. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I think if if and when you're honest with yourself, the symptoms are there, the telltale signs or the minimal cue. There's always little bits of something that you can think, huh, what is that? And like, if you keep a curious mind about what those things are, you'll often find that there's something behind them, and there's an opportunity to grow yourself.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. It has been so wonderful to chat with you, Harry.
It's been a delight.
I have one final question for you.
Uh-oh.
And I mentioned at the beginning that we'll talk a little bit about my daughter at the
Hmm.
end. And I like to ask this question of all my guests. And my
Hmm.
intention is to kind of compile these at some point into some sort of a compilation for her. But she's 3.5 right now, as I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. And as you take a moment and reflect back on your life, where you are now and all the things that you've learned up to this point, if you think back to your 3.5-year-old self,
Hmm.
what what message would you have for you at 3.5 years? What would you want your 3.5 self to know based on what you've
Mm,
learned and experienced so far?
that's a great question. You have to love yourself first.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Thank
Love
you.
yourself first. Yeah.
Mm. Hmm, that one got me. Oh, what a beautiful way to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Harry. If people want to pre-register for your book or get on a
Mhm.
wait list, is something like that possible? Where can people go to connect with you if they would like to learn more or to reach out?
Mhm. So I'm building an email list now. I haven't actually put the mechanics together. Best way to reach me is via LinkedIn right now.
Mhm.
In mail, just send me a note, and I'm keeping a catalog of anybody who's interested, and I'll drop them on a mailing list when I get it built.
Awesome, awesome. And I'll put links in the description and in the podcast playlist to your LinkedIn profile
Thank you.
and a little bit more about you as well that you've shared with me. But
Perfect.
thank you again, Harry. I very much enjoyed our conversation and really looking forward to the book when it comes out.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you reaching out and inviting me into the space.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard today, if you're on YouTube, please consider subscribing. Share this podcast if you think there's valuable nuggets in there that others might enjoy. And if you're listening to this on a podcast directory that you love, please consider leaving a review and sharing that as well. And you can always reach me at tracyloring.com if you have any ideas or suggestions or people you think might be a great fit for this podcast. Thank you. Thanks again, Harry.